Well, I appreciate being able to be here. Good friend of mine, Kathy Shank, is on the board, and if you stay in this room, you'll be able to hear her next with her husband, Jeff. So it's a privilege to be part of the Northwest Coalition for Healthy Intimacy. Today we're going to be talking about using mindfulness to deal with reactive emotions. And this idea, and hopefully some of the practical ways in which this can be applied, will hopefully be applicable to several people groups, the ones that are represented here today. So I was curious, when you're speaking to an audience, particularly live, it's nice to know who's in the room, who I'm talking to. So I'm aware that there are therapists like myself or counselors of some sort that are here in the room. I'm also aware that there are clergy that were invited and may be here today. I'm aware that there may be addicts who are either pre-recovery or beginning recovery or a long way in their recovery. And I'm also aware that there are, of course, spouses, loved ones, those that are impacted by the addict's choices and behaviors. I'm wondering, outside of those categories, if there's anyone here that would represent a different people group. Yes? A student, okay, learning about counseling, okay, and particularly addiction. Excellent. Any other students in here, those that are learning this for further education besides those that are professionals? Okay, well, excellent. Welcome. Hope you learn a lot. So, again, been in private practice at A New Life, started that in 2005. Been working professionally in the field of domestic violence intervention, primarily since 2002, and then sexual addiction recovery from about 2005 up until this last year when I took on the full-time role at the church. Have some exposure to mindfulness early on in my professional training, which was very helpful. In preparation for today's presentation, realizing that much of what I had learned back then that I didn't necessarily recall in like the prefrontal cortex up here, actually became part of what I did. So much of what you'll see today is things that I've been practicing and implementing and incorporating into a lot of our treatment programs that we've offered over the years. Didn't realize that a lot of it came from the mindfulness training and exposure that I had early on in my education. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, you may just do naturally or intuitively. It may be part of what you already practice or seek to practice when it comes to managing reactive emotions. Your own triggers, if you will, whether as a parent, whether as in the workplace. A lot of what workplaces, parenting programs, all those different kinds of things teach you, a lot of this is based, I believe, in kind of the history of mindfulness. The brochure and your descriptions talk about a little bit about, we're going to go into what is mindfulness as well as briefly on its origins and some of the latest research specifically as it applies to mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and we'll get into that in a moment. But basically, if you're not familiar with mindfulness, if you're just walking in going, it sounds like an interesting term, it really means, the best definition I could find actually comes from John Kabat-Zinn. You'll hear more about him and from him. But mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Several of those terms were bolded by himself there, to bring our awareness to the fact that it's really about how you pay attention or how you respond to what's happening. A little bit of the origins of mindfulness. Hinduism, the longest standing documented history of practicing this intentional awareness of what's happening to us or in our environment, dating back to the 1500 BC eras. Taoism, a little bit more recent, although very ancient, history with mindfulness. Buddhism, which is probably the one that we're most familiar with in our culture, which utilizes the Japanese practice of Zen, Buddhism, and meditation. A lot of what mindfulness-based therapy is based on is really the Buddhist particular expression and practice of mindfulness. Christianity in the 5th or 6th century AD, monasteries, the the ones where the monks were kind of by themselves in silence, began practicing mindfulness and incorporating that into the development of the early Christian church. During the Dark Ages, it was very prolific in the practice of Christianity, and then after Protestantism occurred later on, the practice of mindfulness kind of somewhat vanished or was pushed into just several sects, and mainline Protestant Christianity, I wouldn't say rejected it, but definitely didn't promote it or teach it. But there's been a resurgence in recent years, mainly due to like the Pentecostal movement, things like that, about more experientially based Christian experiences. So there's been kind of a resurgence in the Christian faith, if you will, an openness to mindfulness and its integration with Christian and biblically based meditation. Muslims, or Islam faith, in the 9th century, followed by the Jewish in the 10th century. So you can see that all major religious groups have been affected and impacted and utilized mindfulness as part of their tradition, as part of the application of truth as they see it. In the last century, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy really began to develop under the gentleman that I referenced earlier. University of Massachusetts has an entire therapy program and outpatient program that deals exclusively mindfulness-based therapy. So a little bit about mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. It focuses on changing one's relationship to unwanted thoughts, feelings, and body sensations so that participants no longer try to avoid them or react to them automatically, but rather respond to them in an intentional and skillful manner. Most of us are familiar, or a lot of practitioners practice cognitive behavioral therapy. And I kind of taught myself as a cognitive behavioral therapist because it makes sense to me. It's also very research-based, so evidence-based practice, oftentimes for insurance to pay, particularly with Medicare and various programs. They have to have evidence-based, and CBT is legitimate enough as a treatment approach to pass through any kind of screening. So CBT is very popular. CBT focuses on changing the content of individuals' negative thoughts in order to break the link between negative thoughts, negative emotions, and behavior. So how many of you are familiar with the term stinkin' thinkin'? Okay, it's a recovery-based term. Cognitive distortions might be a little more clinical way of describing it. Things like that have become household terms like black and white thinking or all or nothing thinking. May not be as common, but catastrophizing, making a mountain out of a molehill. All these kinds of words and expressions that we use to talk about how we relate to our feelings. Cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on looking at our feelings, examining them and saying, is that a valid feeling to have? I mean, are you making something out of something little? Are you minimizing? Are you denying? Are you rationalizing? Are you distorting your thoughts? And then how can you go back in and change your thoughts to get the outcome that you desire, or to become more reality-based? It's a very effective way of intervening in our thoughts. So if people are becoming suicidal or people are acting out in addiction, to say, is this really rational, and try to control those thoughts to bring them into more of a reality-based situation. So often this involves encouraging individuals to examine the evidence for certain, to identify logical errors and to generate alternative thoughts and beliefs. So replace unhealthy thinking with healthy thinking, and that's kind of how it works. Mindfulness therapy, a bit different. Here's how. On the other hand, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy emphasizes acceptance of, rather than control over, one's thoughts and feelings. So relative to CBT and BCT, more heavily emphasizes, and this is key, change in the relationship that people have with their thoughts and feelings, rather than changing the content of thoughts and feelings. Because here's the reality that we live in, particularly when it relates to sexual addiction. And we learned about this morning through some of the spouses and their recovery work. what happens when you think your husband is having an affair and you're having all kinds of heightened anxiety and hypervigilance, and you can tell yourself, you're just overreacting, you have no reason to mistrust him, he might be feeding into that. CBT would be great if you're thinking something that's not true to try to bring it into reality. What do you do when you're the unfortunate victim of finding out it actually is true? How will cognitive behavioral therapy help you besides thinking the right thing to do would be to turn that wedding ring into a bullet? So this is a case where we can't alter the thoughts and feelings. They are accurate. They are real. There's nothing that we're doing to distort it. What do we do to keep from melting down? What do we do to keep making good choices for the health of ourselves, our families, even the addict themselves? How do you have a compassionate approach when you're just angry and hurt, as all get out? So I believe that mindfulness-based therapy is a much better tool to utilize in that scenario particularly, as well as how it relates to the addict themselves and others. So hopefully that's clear, that the difference is not necessarily trying to change or control your thoughts and feelings, rather accepting them. Things like, it's rational to feel this way, anyone else would feel this way. And so having a little more self-compassion in the midst of the emotion versus, I need to be happy, I need to be full of joy, I need to be forgiving, I need to be, all these things. This is a saying that, like I told you, I came up with this not knowing why or how I came up with this. But I tell all my clients, some would, if they were here today, would tell you, yes, I've heard this many times. It's not our thoughts and feelings that tend to get us into trouble. It's our thoughts and feelings about our thoughts and feelings that do. And I thought I was, Buddha himself or the Dalai Lama, But come to find out, that is basically the essence of mindfulness. There is nothing new under the sun in terms of wisdom. We just all kind of borrow and share and redistribute, and then we put our logo on it, But that's basically the essence of mindfulness. It's not so much that you're feeling anxious. You may have good reason. It's not so much that you are feeling depressed. You may have good reason. It's what you add to that, or how it compounds or snowballs, if you will, into further thinking and feelings that cause damage or further unhealth. So, mindfulness, kind of the ABCs of mindfulness. And again, I cited Juliet Adams here. She's the founder of mindfulnet.org. Juliet doesn't apparently know our alphabet. She starts out strong with A is for awareness, becoming more aware of what you are thinking and doing, what's going on in your mind and body. This is probably the most popular or most widespread understanding of mindfulness, is about awareness, what's happening. B is for just being, so we got a B there, with your experience. So rather than try to, again, change your experience, get rid of the negative feelings, stop being angry, quit being so sad, you practice the art or the discipline of simply being with your feeling for at least a moment. Slowing down, accepting the fact that I feel angry, I feel enraged, I feel extremely sad, I feel, whatever the feeling is, even if it's a negative feeling. Human nature, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, we avoid pain and we seek pleasure, right? Anybody here not identify with that phenomenon? If something's painful or difficult, we tend to go, ugh. And then if something's pleasurable and fun, we tend to go, great. How do you override that if the reality that you live in is not just pleasure? It involves some pain. Well, what they suggest here, or what mindfulness suggests, is just being with it. Avoid the tendency to respond on autopilot. We all know about fight, flight, freeze. There's also a lot of defensiveness, reaction. We can go back to our family of origin and look at a lot of that and try to override that, because it can often feed to problems. So avoiding the tendency to respond on autopilot and feed problems by creating your own story. So if you just be, you're not creating an outcome or a story or jumping ahead to the end of what good behavior might suggest for you. You're just first being there. C is for seeing things and responding more wisely. By creating a gap between the experience and our reaction to it, we can make wiser choices. So this whole idea is like insert time gap here, because we all are going to react to our emotions in one way or the other. So the idea of mindfulness is to insert a pause. This is very effective, and why I developed this over the years was working with domestic violence perpetrators. A vast majority of them, I would say, would tell you and have told me, it's not a premeditated event. The victim often experiences it like, wow, they must have planned this. But I believe, no, it's a lack of an ability to insert time and good judgment. It's kind of a slavery, if you will, to what's happening emotionally, and a lack of awareness and a lack of belief in oneself to override whatever they're feeling in the moment. Makes no difference to whoever's experiencing those choices, what's going on for the person that's doing them. But for the person doing them, which is what we're focusing on here, is intervention. So again, creating a gap, the all-important gap. The Dalai Lama, when asked what surprised him most about humanity, he answered, man sacrifices his health in order to make money. Then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health. Then he is so anxious about the future that he does not enjoy the present. The result being that he does not live in the present or the future, he lives as if he is never going to die, and then dies having never really lived. Pretty profound statement that it's alongside what we're talking about. Is the idea of being present, of not missing out, of making choices in the midst of what we might deem in our Western world as the rat race or the stress of life. Many addicts that I've worked with in sexual addiction recovery, including my own recovery, it's just slowing down, being aware, understanding what Stephanie so wonderfully presented this morning in terms of the brain chemistry, being more accepting of the fact that it just is what it is, and then making choices related to that versus being an Autobot or an autopilot. And sadly, it can define what I heard Stephanie Karn's father say. It really defines our whole culture, is this sped up, not living in the moment, getting to the next thing, being distracted. How many of you are checking emails and texts even as I speak right now? Because it's just, we're not present. That's not a slam. I didn't see anybody. I just know that it's probably common in our culture. The benefits of mindfulness. You might be asking, okay, well, what's the benefit if I'm supposed to slow down or teach people to slow down? There are drastic benefits. So it's a way of paying attention to and seeing clearly whatever is happening in our lives. It's important to understand, and this is, I said last night when I was talking about what I was going to be saying, I'm a Christian counselor presenting on, Buddhist Zen mindfulness. I said, I think Jesus and Buddha would have been good friends because he talks a lot about these same concepts, that in this life you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world, Jesus of Nazareth. Buddha would say a lot of the same things, that it will not eliminate life's pressures, but it can help us respond to them in a calmer manner that benefits our heart, head, and body. This kind of intervention can relate to those of us that are control freaks or a little more OCD or kind of have to have things a certain way. In an effort, if we're motivated by an effort to eliminate problems, to get our children to behave, to eradicate every threat of porn or sexualized media in our house or in our culture, this can become a very consuming drive, but it's not necessarily healthy to live that way. So the benefit is you don't have to live in that bondage to trying to fix everything and being distressed when it's not fixed. Mindfulness benefits continued. It allows us to recognize, slow down, or stop automatic and habitual reactions. I know for myself, for those that I work with, and I'm talking very universal if you haven't noticed, I'm including myself and each of us in the room. It's not just about addiction, it's not just about those impacted by addiction, but it's universally beneficial to just slow down, to not have to react to situations, but have a response. So there's a book called 3 Seconds. I don't know if you've heard of it, but the subtitle is The Difference Between a Reaction and a Response. And they were based on studies that if people just took 3 seconds to pause before they say or do something in response to a stimulus, the outcome is tremendously different. You have more control over what you say and do, and of course we all have responsibility for what we say and do. The other benefits are respond more effectively to complex or difficult situations. So this is kind of an antithesis to that black and white thinking or all or nothing thinking. But when we're talking about addiction and the impact of sexual addiction, it's easy to watch the news and go, that guy should be castrated or they should be thrown in prison. It's a little different when it's your son or when it's your husband, the father of your children, the one who makes maybe a predominant amount of money in the home or something, and you say, well, just throw him in jail. Well, it's not. It's not that easy. It's not that black and white. So mindfulness comes into great value and effect when we practice it in these real life situations. We see them more clearly. We become more creative. It's not either or. It can be both and, or something else that we never thought of. Again, if we take time, if we're aware, if we think of alternatives. Lastly, but certainly not the very last, because this is not a comprehensive list, but we achieve balance and resilience in other areas of life. So if we're practicing this in our parenting, we're practicing this with our own self-shame cycles, we're practicing this with those that have hurt us, we'll see the benefits in all areas of life. And I would argue because our brains actually change the way that we process emotion. So lots of benefits to mindfulness. The other option, when I work with clients, I often have a sheet of paper and I'll just write denial or suppression as one option. So you're feeling this way, but you could just deny it, suppress it, stuff it, pretend like it's not happening or it's not as bad as it is. How will that work for you? I kind of drop the Dr. Phil on them. Or if they have a history of suppressing or denying emotions, I ask them, how's that working? How's the blood pressure medication and the ulcer medication working for you? Is this thing still on? Okay. The other is to problem solve, to go external, to fix whatever it is that's causing the problem. If I'm completely stressed out because there's just not enough money in the account and we keep going overdrafted and I hate paying $35 every time I buy a cup of coffee or something, one of the ways to eliminate that kind of stress is to what? Yeah, more money, right? And adding to that would be, more credit, would be more stress. But to have more money was in the account, stress goes down, problem solved. So that's when we can fix it, by all means fix it. AA has the prayer of the Serenity Prayer that says, God grant me the courage to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that second part there is change what you can. If you can change it, do it. If you're tired of feeling a certain way and you can do something about it, by all means, do it. But that first one, acceptance of things that I cannot change, that's where it gets real tricky. So I'm not in denial. I can't fix it or change it or control it. Then I'm left with the third option, which is coping. And that's where we go internal. That's when we have to tell ourselves something different about the situation that's before us. So we're not trying to sweep it under the rug. We're not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. We're saying, this is what we're dealing with. How do I deal with it best? Because I can't fix it, can't go back, can't change it. So that's kind of the three options. So looking at emotional suppression, how many know this guy? I don't understand these emotions, Captain. He's just not emotion, denial. Emotions are he can conceive of them in his brain, but feeling them is nearly impossible. And so that's kind of one extreme, the person that just goes into denial. Emotions aren't important, it's just, facts, it's logical, it's what you do. We would say that Spock, although, he was an endearing character for some reason, he's not human, right? He's Vulcan. So you and I are not Vulcan, although there are people, I think, that are taking great lengths to become Vulcan, at least, through some of the things I've seen on some of those other conferences that are happening today. But he's our model for emotional suppression. Just because he's a male does not mean that females don't have the capacity to go into suppression, denial, putting up a false front. And so the thing with Spock is apparently through character development in the series, Gene Roddenberry enhanced his character to actually feel a lot of feelings. So you can see them there. A lot of display of emotion there in Spock. So he did eventually evolve. No, of course, he's not. Despite what may be going on, he doesn't change. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is to kind of be a reactor. What we talked about. Mindfulness, gone, right? I knew Spock was a great emotional suppression. I mean, it's like he's built for, being an illustration of something like this. So I had to look really hard. Who out there that we all may know of reacts emotionally without really pausing, without thinking it through, without taking into account consequences or even their own, what they might look like in that situation? That's who I came up with. Okay. Good or bad, helpful or not. Loved this show growing up. But Lucy would come up with all kinds of schemes, react, just impulsive to a T, in her character. Hilarious, endearing again. But a lot of people feel like I love Lucy, like Lucy Ricardo, like I just act and react without thinking. So we're trying to, again, mind about balance, rational mind of Spock. There we go. On one extreme, very useful, very helpful to think things through. On the other extreme, again, we have Lucy, who's acknowledging her feelings, how, all of that. That's the emotional mind, and we're trying to find balance. We're trying to give credibility and honor, if you will, to our feelings, as well as have the best response possible without suppressing those feelings. Why is this important? We all have a brain, right? Right. Okay, good. Hoping I was in the right room. So we all have a brain, and we learned a lot about the brain in terms of addiction this morning. One of the things we need to understand about our brains, we have this automated response system, sometimes called the limbic system. And it's the here we go again. It's the trigger response that automatically goes into play based on what we've learned so far in life. So we just keep patching this thing and get, version 7.1 and then 9.6 and then marriage 0.2, we just keep adding to how we react to situations, and it's automatic. It's how you guys all got here today in terms of if you drive a manual, transmission, or turned your blinkers, or did what you did getting here. A lot of it was on automated response. You didn't have to think, oh gosh, which first, clutch? Oh, clutch, unless you're just a beginner. So the very complex skills can be learned and put into our automated response system, so we don't even have to think about it. And that's where mindfulness comes in, as kind of let's bring this back up into the awareness. Let's make a habit or a discipline of always being mindful of what it is we're doing and why. So cognitive reappraisal is this phrase that is used in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. It's defined as changing how one thinks about an emotional stimulus in order to change its emotional impact. And I'm no neuropsychologist, don't even touch that phrase. So Stephanie Carnes and others much more advanced in that. But my understanding of it is that a very small part, if you take the total matter of our brain, is devoted to this automatic response system. We have all this other part of our brain that's wonderfully available at times to override what our impulse is telling us to do, which is good news, particularly if you're an addict, particularly if you're impacted by an addict's behavior, because everything in you wants to do stuff. And we all know maturity or becoming an adult is about, overriding some of those impulses. I've said before, if every 2-year-old had access to weapons, we'd all be dead. They just don't have that ability to override what's impulsive. So part of our progression as human beings is to develop the other parts of our brain. Sometimes I'll refer to them as like the accountants, kind of the nerds that are like, excuse me, before you do that, you might want to consider, the impact of the finances and the emotional, that part of our brain that's thinking about what we're doing so that these passionate decisions are lessened. So that's kind of what cognitive reappraisal is all about, again, in my understanding of it. So we have the ability to do this, and it's important to have the belief that even if our system stinks, if you will, or is weak, or hasn't, we haven't built this up in a particular area, that we can. There is hope for being able to beef up or bolster our ability to do effective cognitive reappraisal. So how do we do this? Well, again, the MBT or MBCT clinic suggests these 4 steps. Number 1 is to, and these are actually A, B, C, D, for those of you that like that stuff like me. Number 1 is to acknowledge my feelings. This is what I talked about, avoiding denial. And in this case, like I said, this is kind of where the fork in the road, where CBT may not be helpful or relevant, because once I've eliminated thinking errors and distortions, I'm left with the reality of whatever it is that's happening in the moment. We know this from grief and loss, that you have to come to a point of acceptance that this is awful and it did happen. There's nothing you can do to change it. So you acknowledge that. Then you back away if needed. You avoid any and all impulsive decisions. In intervention for domestic violence, anger management, those kinds of things, we talk about taking a time out. Again, inserting that time. Very important intervention. Doesn't change the beliefs, doesn't change the impulses, but it can stop the behavior. And if that's all you're, trying to do at the beginning, that's effective. A lot of bad decisions are made based on, emotional reactivity. So you're trying to get yourself separated from the situation so that you can consider the alternatives. You avoid that here we go again ride of the limbic system. And, addicts can relate to this constantly. It's just like Stephanie was mentioning this morning, that, almost like in a trance driving around, not being aware of time, not being aware of a lot of things that, their senses would otherwise pick up, the good judgment that we do have. So you want to avoid that. So you consider alternatives. In this stage, I inserted, find wisdom. Once you've acknowledged and you've not decided to do something, like, in a lot of cases, it's, I'm going to divorce. Okay, well, that's certainly an option. Is that the best option for you at this time? Have you considered children? Have you considered financial impact? Have you considered timing of that? Have you considered other things? But a lot of people will try to find, some solace or hope or some sense of purpose in something that may not be the best option. They may end up regretting certain decisions later on. So it's important to consider what your alternative are, and to decide then, again, with balanced mind, taking into account how you feel and the impact it's had, not minimizing or denying it, and then making the best decision possible. This helps you to avoid a possible victim mentality. It allows one to take responsibility for everything they do. I never met one perpetrator of domestic violence, which means someone who had been either convicted or arrested or accused of a crime against another person of an intimate relationship, without hearing their victim story. They truly believed in that moment they were a victim. It's the only reason why they justified acting out. And again, it doesn't matter for the person who truly is the victim, but it is important for that person to understand you're not a victim. You may have been hurt. That might have been hypersensitive. That might have been spot on. You needed to back away because anything you did at that point, you're accountable and responsible for. And you have choice. I put that across all of life, that we always have a choice. You know, the two young football players recently that tackled the referee, you know, if you follow the, pop culture news, these boys are apparently, saying, well, our coach told us to do it, and not even acknowledging that it was wrong. That's a victim mentality or a powerless position. None of us are powerless. We all have power over ourselves. So mindfulness really speaks to that, really empowers people to know what's going on and to try to make the best choice possible. The steps to freedom are eerily similar to the tenets, again, of kind of the Buddhist practice of mindfulness. And it's real simple. First step is to observe, not to participate, not to try to stop or control what's happening. Then, again, you acknowledge without judgment so that you can return and exercise choice. So this thing just goes around. What's happening? I'm not going to do anything about it, just going to observe it. Going to acknowledge it, not going to shame myself. You shouldn't feel this way. A good husband or a good wife or a good parent would or should or do this. So you're eliminating that. You're simply saying, I have an urge to wring their neck right now. I'm not going to judge that. It just is. I can see it in my head. There they are. I'm going, yep, I see it. Not going to judge myself. Someone else might feel that same way, and I probably wouldn't judge them either. So, once I acknowledge that, you can just sense, if you've ever gone through this process yourself, one way or the other, you know what it feels like to just get all bound up because you can't do what you want to do and you're all full of condemnation and judgment on yourself. And then you know the other side of it if you've practiced, any kind of self-compassion that says, you know what? Of course I feel this way. It's okay. Some of you have friends or you found a counselor that it's okay just to share those things without judgment because you just want to get it out. Those of you that do read the Bible are familiar with King David when he wrote his Psalms. Very honest, want them all dead, want to kill them all. And yet, he would return, exercise choice to move back up. So, except for in the one case, which, if those of you that read your Bibles know, that he got off this triangle at one point in his life. So there, again, going back to the benefits, giving yourself some wiggle room, some margin, some grace, whatever you want to call it, again, allows you to make those decisions. And those decisions, as we all know, as parents, if you have parents, trying to communicate to your kid, I understand how you feel. I just don't care. Sorry. Bad parenting. I understand how you feel. Honey, dear, sweetie, you're still responsible for what you do. I know you want to hit your little brother. I know you want to skip school. I know you want to date that boy or that girl. But I, as a parent, care about you, care about the choices you're going to make and the way that those choices are going to impact your life. So I'm concerned for you. Would you please consider your choices? You have as much bandwidth as you need to feel and process what you need to feel. Well, that's what we need to internalize as good parents, if you will, to ourselves. Understanding that we have choices that we make, and those choices are our responsibility and no one else's. So this is huge in working with those that are in addiction or impacted by it. If you're a clergy member, this is great sermon stuff to incorporate into your teaching. If you're a counselor, this is obviously great stuff to move into your treatment plan. Talk about how are you doing, a scale of 1 to 10. Did you feel like you did well this week in terms of what we've been working on? Trying to step back. Did you feel like you were impulsive? Did you feel like you made good choices? So this is very helpful, I believe. This is, again, just Paul writes in 2 Corinthians, this idea that it's our thoughts, this is one of my favorite passages because it illustrates that there's a place in our brain that we can think about our thoughts. It's an interesting concept for me. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ in this case. So he's saying that we have the ability to think about what we're thinking and then to decide whether we arrest that sucker, put it in jail, and throw away the key, or whether we let it out, roam the streets of our mind, and control what we do. I like that. That gives me hope. But just because I think something doesn't mean that that defines who I am or what my values are or what I'm going to do. That we have power over what even we think, whatever comes naturally to us or habitually to us. Addicts are extremely hopeless individuals when it comes to their thinking, in terms of how they perceive themselves as people. It's like, oh no, I was doing so well, and then this thought, or then she or it came into my radar. I am powerless. Oh no, here I go again. No, no, no. Yes, yes, yes. No, no, no. All that stuff. And it's scripted out time and time again. And again, if there's a spouse of someone, it's like, I was doing so well, and then I got triggered, and now my whole day's ruined, and oh no, and this is, who knows how long it's going to last. To feel very powerless is a very difficult feeling. Again, if we feel powerless, we simply acknowledge we feel powerless, and then we decide, how long do I want to feel powerless, for instance? If I saw a text that I thought was from someone inappropriate, find out that it's not, what can I do to, what am I going to do about that? Do I want it to ruin my whole day? Well, I got other things to do, and you can start, again, using rational mind while accepting the fact that, of course, I feel triggered. Who wouldn't? So again, it's not our thoughts and feelings that tend to get us into trouble. It's our thoughts and feelings about our thoughts and feelings that do. Okay, going to give you a real simple, this is the John Kabat-Zinn guy. So one of their practices at the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy school is just a simple exercise of starting with A, to acknowledge what's happening. So you can now take a nap and check out, or if you'd like to participate, it's only going to be about 5 minutes, and just a very simple exercise that gets the ball rolling in terms of mindfulness. Some of you have done this before. Some of you, this might be the first time. What we're going to try to do is deal with that second layer of thoughts and feelings. So what we're going to try to deal with that in the sense that we're going to try to just ignore it or erase the noise that's around our thoughts and feelings. One of the easiest ways to do this is to not go to our emotions, but simply to our 5 senses, okay? So we have our sense of what? Taste, sight, scent, touch, and hearing. Okay, good. So, pending you have all those intact. If you don't, then you can skip that portion. We're just going to simply go through the 5 senses and simply observe what it is that's happening in each of those senses. The goal is to try and get out of what you think about what you're hearing, seeing, tasting, and or what you think about the thought that you're being told to, and what's for dinner and what kind of popcorn, all that kind of stuff. We have popcorn, by the way, this afternoon. Excited about that. But I'm going to try not to think about that. So just going to have you guys go through this exercise. I do this with the guys. I've taken actually men out to we had a field in a park up from one of the treatment centers that I worked at. And, here I'm walking down with all these, DV offender guys. We're going to the park and we're just laying in the grass on a warm afternoon. I'm taking them through this exercise. It was interesting I wish we had a video of the walk there and the walk back. Very different, just in terms of their body language, the tone of conversation. It was a very, centering exercise. So you might enjoy this, might make you miserable. Here we go. Okay, so let's start with sight, because that's probably our most acute sense. So I want you to try to just focus on what you see and just take into account some of the things that you may have seen without really seeing them. So start looking around and tell me out loud what you noticed in the last 30 seconds that you didn't notice before. What did you see? Great. So sight is probably one of the easiest ones to do. So what we're going to do is eliminate it, okay? So ladies, grab your purses, get them near. So we're going to close our eyes, okay? And just going to ask you to now focus on the next one, which is hearing. Just want us all to be quiet for a moment and just tell me what you hear. Yeah, how many of you were mindful of the air conditioner prior to this exercise, that you were aware? Okay, about half the room. Okay, let's go to a difficult one, but we just had lunch, so it's a lot easier. Focus on what do you taste. This is an interesting one, and you can keep your eyes shut or open them if it helps to focus, keep them closed. But feeling, just sitting there in your seat, start with your toes. Tell me what you feel. Go up your body or start at your top of your head and go down. What do you actually feel, sensation-wise? What do we have left? Smell. That's an interesting one. You don't have to share out loud if you don't want to. Yeah, so again, thank you guys for participating. That's just, what I learned from doing that exercise for the first time was the awareness of how much I wasn't aware of what was happening around me. And so this exercise really starts with just the mindset that says, I wonder what's happening that I'm not aware of, which can lead to all kinds of discoveries. And it doesn't have to be this idea that, there's pre-concluded, it's like your kid saying, there's nothing to watch on TV. Are you kidding me? Those use cable or satellites. Like, there's a million things. Or in our house, we got stacks of DVDs, nothing here to watch. So it's just, we get in these mindsets, that there are limits to our experiences because of the past. And so mindfulness really helps us just to start to explore and become, curious even, so that we can say, I wonder how this is going to turn out. I'll end here with at least my section here before we go to questions, with a story of when this really became alive and personal for me. And it actually happened in a conversation with my wife, who was here last night. She wasn't able to make it today. Beautiful, wonderful woman. We were lying in bed one evening, and in one of our, if you stay for Jeff and Kathy's conflict, managing conflict classes, Carol and I didn't have this class at this point in our marriage. So I'm sitting there listening, and this is, expose time in terms of I admit this is not the right way to think. But I'm aware that I'm thinking, are you kidding me? That's not true. You're misunderstanding me. Where did you get that? So you talk about judgment. Everything she was saying, and she just wanted to share her feelings. She knew that they could be irrational. She knew that it could be inaccurate or whatever. She just was trying to share with me her experience of something that we were fighting about. Who knows what it was. And I'm just sitting there just getting more and more wow. And because of this kind of stuff, I challenged myself to just be there. Not try to get rid of the feeling, not try to correct what I thought was distorted, not judging myself. And all of a sudden, literally like a visceral feeling came up in my stomach of just this knot of life's not fair, or I'm being misunderstood, which you don't have to psychoanalyze me. I already know where that comes from now. But anyways, it was just this whole idea of, she's hurting me by talking the way she is. And I felt this thing rise up, and I just remember thinking, Brad, you don't have to do anything with this. Or better yet, I was actually thinking, I wonder where this feeling is coming from and how big it'll get and what will happen. I know better not to act on it. And then I remember thinking, I was listening at the same time, just so you know. I was multitasking. I was listening to her, trying to understand where she was coming from, and also aware that I had this thing in my stomach. Then I became very aware, I wonder if this is what some of the guys that I work with deal with, and they don't know what to do. and they are scared like I am of this feeling. They don't want it. They are trying to get rid of it. I wonder if they act out, because the thought is, would you just shut up, or would you quit talking, or would you hear me, or any of those impulses. I thought, oh my goodness, is this what these men are acting on or trying to avoid? So thank God, I didn't go there, but I just thought, I wonder how this is going to turn out. And this feeling came up, and it was like it was in my chest, and it hurt, and it felt nasty, and I didn't like it. And I just thought, I wonder if I'm going to explode. I don't know. Like, is my chest going to open up like an alien and something's going to come out? I don't know. And I just sat there, and guess what happened? Eventually it kind of dissolved, and she was done, and she even asked me, she said, aren't you going to say anything? Because usually I would say something or defend myself. I said, no, I think I'm just better off sleeping on this one. And so next morning, she came to me and she said, wow, well, thank you for listening, and I'm sorry, I said a lot of things that I didn't really mean, and I was kind of being a brat. And then she looked at me and she goes, you took that like a man. The greatest compliment I've ever received from my wife is I thought, oh, that's what she needed. She needed me to be somebody who could control my reaction, respond to her with a listening ear. And I took I wanted to learn and understand what she had to say. I wish I could say I live that way every day in all my relationships, but that's not true. But I do believe that was an experience that has never left me. I keep going back to that, to when I find myself, wanting to, I feel something in me. I would never have awareness of even that sensation if someone hadn't have sat me down and said, Brad, what are you feeling right now? What are you talking about? Well, no, what are you feeling right now? I don't know. I'm feeling, I guess, well, you seem angry. Well, I am angry. Okay, well, where do you feel that? What do you mean, where do I feel it? Where in your body do you feel that feeling? Well, I guess it's, well, if I think about it, oh, yeah, there's kind of this thing. So, been introduced to that process and was able to practice it in a situation that actually brought my wife and I closer together. So, again, using this training or these techniques is so important. And the research that I did talked about this idea of worshiping mindfulness versus practicing mindfulness. And I would encourage you not to gain knowledge of mindfulness in order to stand in awe of it or teach it or talk about it, but to actually practice it. That what the people that develop this want people to practice it and live it, not just learn about it. So with that, I'll open up for some questions. We have about 8-9 minutes. Well, like I said, there's external and internal interventions. So what I mean by that is, like, you can either cope and do what you're trying to do, which is talk yourself out of it, but your reaction then is a behavior that is trying to fix the problem, right? So you're either going to yell, or you're going to plead, or you're going to beg, or you're going to do something. So the idea is that's not going to work either, so you remove yourself. So the only way to fix the problem is to prevent you from doing the behavior, which is external, which is get out of the room, or get out of the conversation if you can safely. Just say, I need a timeout. Or I don't have anything good to say, back to what my mom said at least. If you don't have anything good to say, don't say it at all. And that's hard, so it's impulse control at that point, which then, hopefully we can have a little compassion for people that we judge. How can you be so impulsive? It's like, well, same way you are right now, So it is about, I would say, and that's why I recommend timeouts, is get yourself out of that situation until you can build up that internal ability to take every thought captive. Does that help? Okay, yeah. Yeah, the main, the basic, if you take the big principles and boil them down, talk about validation of their feelings. So a lot of empathy, start with empathy. Oh, how to talk so your kids will listen, how to listen so your kids will talk. That's a great intro into empathic kind of communication. And then giving the choices and let them know they're responsible for their behavior. Yeah.
Daniel Siegel has
Yes.
several really good books, Parenting from the Inside Out. He has an awesome website also that's all his parenting stuff, little videos parents can watch.
Yeah, what's
Really
the
helpful.
well-brain child or healthy brain child? Is that
whole brain child.
Whole brain
Yeah, and he has a
child.
new book for teenagers and one for adolescents. He's got a bunch of new ones in the last couple of years.
Yeah,
and
that
they're
one's on my
fabulous.
shelf. It needs to be read, but it's on my shelf, so I'm one step ahead.
Daniel Siegel, Siegel. Parenting from the Inside Out was his first big parenting book.
Okay, we're going to hear your question.
My question is, when you're on the receiving end of that explosive behavior, what can you do, or what should you do to step back and to be able to help that person, or even just to help yourself to be able to go through this mindfulness?
Well, I mean, I think I would just, yeah, it's the ABC thing. I mean, you're impacted by their behavior. I mean, they're going through their own cycle and either doing well or not. And then I would say, yeah, acknowledge what you're feeling, step back, don't judge yourself. I mean, I don't know how many people I've worked with, women in particular, that didn't call the police or didn't see the warning, they didn't take the best step, make the best decision when they were in danger. Because of the other thoughts and noise and voices, or a little devil on the shoulder, or whatever you want to call it, that was telling them things. And so I would just say, figure out what it is you're feeling, don't have judgment, make the best decision possible.
Well, and I think in your ABCs, that step back can be either a mental, or sometimes it needs to be a physical.
Yeah.
Can you give us a minute? Or let's talk about this in 5 minutes, that type of actual physical space too.
Yeah, the timeout, I mean, that's the hands down the tool that we use the most. So the goal of the exercise was to start with physical, because most people can relate more to the physical than what's going on emotionally, but you're steps ahead, and you can skip that step, so to speak. So yeah, I would say it's going to be, for your relationship's sake, it's going to be more beneficial to know what's going on the inside anyways, and then apply these principles. So the sensational exercise through the senses is more just to get used to it. And I'm aware too, like, I don't know how many would be in here that have like sensory disorders, or you wear particular clothing because you do feel it, and it feels horrible. So there's a spectrum there of even some of those things.